I'm author and critic David Agranoff. I'm a horror and science fiction author, critic, and researcher. In this podcast, I wanted to provide in-depth interviews and panel discussions with everyone from New York Times bestselling authors to researchers, musicians, and anyone I find interesting. Welcome to Postcards from a Dying World. Hello and welcome to Postcards from a Dying World. I have a very special episode today, the fourth appearance of Josh Malerman on this here podcast. Last time we talked basketball, and we did schedule this podcast around basketball in order to make sure that we were able to watch the Nuggets and Lakers tonight. Which is an odd thing for me because I don't like either team, Josh. I really don't.
Oh, you don't like that? Oh, right. You definitely don't like Denver. I forgot that. Yeah.
As a Trailblazer fan,
yeah.
Jokic drives me nuts. I know it's beautiful basketball, whatever.
Oh my God, it is gorgeous. I'm having a hard time picking five better centers right now in the history of the game. That's how good this guy is. We can talk about this on another episode if you want. But I mean, I'm going to bed at night counting. I'm like Kareem, Russell. I'm like, honestly, dude. Yeah.
Well, I have a Serbian basketball nerd friend. Shout out to Ivan Zoric, who is also a horror nerd and a writer. But he's from Serbia, a basketball nerd. So of course he loves Jokic. So just two quick announcements before we get into this. I do have some appearances coming up that I want to tell people about. I'm going to be in charge of panels at StokerCon this year and making sure they're on time and running. So I'll be at probably every single panel at StokerCon in one way or another. But it's here in San Diego. It's walking distance from my house. So please, if you got books you want them signed or whatever, find me there. But I'm also going to be at the International Philip K. Dick Conference in June 13th through the 16th in Fort Morgan, Colorado. So, folks, a lot of really cool writers, D. Harlan Wilson, James Reich, Umberto Rossi is coming all the way from Italy for it. So this is like the epicenter of the dickhead world. So, and I will be previewing my unfinished PKD book at the festival. So very excited to be there and do that. So just wanted to shout those out. And now the main show, Josh Malerman returning. We are going to mostly talk about the two most recent books, Spin a Black Yarn and the forthcoming, I should say, Incidents Around the House, which I have already read. And it's not out yet, so we're going to do spoilers on Spin a Black Yarn. I will give you a warning. But before that, we'll do a non-spoiler discussion on both Spin a Black Yarn and Incidents Around the House. People, these are incredible books. So, Spin a Black Yarn, you can go out and read right now. And as a matter of fact, Josh, you should know that we talked quite a bit about Spin a Black Yarn in the virtual StokerCon panel that I recorded yesterday on the pros and cons of big and small town horror. And three of the panelists had just read Spin a Black Yarn in the last month. So we talked quite a bit about the book on that panel.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. So people look out for that. I'm on that panel. And we also talked a lot about The Shining and Salem's Lot too. So and the process of writing small and big towns. So we're going to talk a lot about writing small towns, I have a feeling, because this man wrote Goblin, and that's how it came up. But so Spin a Black Yarn is a collection of novellas. And I want to talk just about what the novella means to you. this is your second collection of novellas in the sense that Goblin is interconnected novellas, and it would be easy to kind of misremember Goblin as a novel, right? Because they're so well connected. But what was the thinking in doing another collection of novellas?
Definitely not the same approach as Goblin. You're totally right. Like Goblin was I mean, obviously intentionally a single night. Just y- all the characters, it was like six obsessives that were all their obsessions were, coming to a head in this same rainy night in Goblin. And all the interweaving, it was intentional in the first story where Richard introduces Charles to the town. And in the
Right.
second story, where Camp gives the history. So it works as a novel. You're introduced to the town, you get the history, and now by the time you get to the magic show, now we're in the present. And with Sam Hatton and Spin a Black Yarn, which, by the way, the original leadoff novella was Daphne. So it was Daphne and then the rest of this. And then,
And it got away from you, didn't it?
well, Del Rey, Trisha, my editor said, this first novella should be its own novel and the rest of these stand together. And I was like, no way. In my head, I was like, no, because to me, it made sense to start with this sort of fastball over the plate horror story, Daphne. And
Right.
then we start to expand with Half the House is Haunted and this kind of thing. But she was like, no, there's a whole novel here. I mean, Daphne was woefully like underdeveloped as a novella. It really was.
Mhm.
And so it was her idea. And she's like, no, you start with Half the House is Haunted. You start with these kids, these two, Robin and Stephanie, as kids and what they're going through in this house. And I was like, oh, shoot, right, this works. So I just want to point that out that Trisha and Del Rey really did sort of shape how this book came out. Because to me, the leadoff of a collection of novellas is a really big deal.
Right.
It sets like a real mood, right? So,
Right.
so yeah. So, I mean, yeah, Sam Hatton, Chaps, Goblin, like, they're all around each other. And with all the books, Pearl, even on Mary Carroll has Sam Hatton on the old West map and everything. So, but no interconnected sense of like no chance of it being a novel. The only thing that even has a chance of that is Igorov on its own.
Hmm. Right. Which we'll get to all of them individually, but and so the the one thing that kind of connects everything is this fictional town of Sam Hatton, and like you said, it's kind of adjacent to Goblin, but it's very much a part of your kind of Stephen King's Maine and Malerman's Michigan, right? And what I really like about because even the stories that go deep into or go into space, right, kind of have like this connection to Sam Hatton, and so I'm assuming from the beginning that's something that you had planned, that all the stories would have kind of this grounding in this place, right?
Yeah, I think so. The only one where and you noted in your review that I read, the Jupiter drop, it took like a thread. I needed to give it one thread, like one
Yeah.
piece of string connecting it. I loved the idea of like Little Russia in old school, like Sam Hatton. I loved that idea for
Mm.
Igorov. And but to me, Sam Hatton feels like a blank white canvas, a much colder, almost like industrial building, this kind of thing. Whereas Goblin is a very colorful, rainy, obsessive place. So Sam Hatton, it's you. I just wouldn't find a story like Half the House is Haunted in Goblin. You might find you might find the second story in Goblin where maybe because a guy who spent his life obsessing over this, right? But
Yeah.
even that, there's a measured to in Argyle. There's a measure to Sean's thinking. So
So what you're saying is that Goblin as a place, like the ground almost kind of seeps obsession, and that's like what ties those
right,
stories in that city.
you just explained it better than I did in 5 minutes. Yep, which is right. Goblin is a character. I don't think Sam Hatton's a character. Sam Hatton's
Yeah.
a place.
And how much of you do you have you mapped it or any of that stuff, or is that like kind of up here already?
A little of both. When I had written, I think 3 or 4 stories that took place there before, but Daphne is the one where it got mapped. Daphne was where the cemetery is in the center of town, and the town sort of spokes out from there. And here's the candy shop, and here's the downtown buildings, and all that sort of stuff. So Daphne sort of mapped it out for me.
And then you got Little Russia now, which is a really interesting kind of wrinkle to the city, especially in Michigan's an interesting state for the fact that um, Michigan, more than some places, has very cultural pockets in different parts of the state and the city. You know, with the largest Middle Eastern population in the
Yep.
United States, for example.
And I think Finnish too in the Upper Peninsula.
Right.
Yes, you're right. There really are some interesting like full blown pockets. Yeah.
Well, Minnesota also had like
Yep.
back in the day, Minnesota had like Swedish concentration and
Yep.
and
Yep. Wisconsin also. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I mean that tended to happen more in early 20th century, but yeah, I think that's a fascinating a part of it. And one of the things that I always one of the things I always say about your work is, and I say this all the time, that you're a writer's writer because there's things that I see under the hood that maybe readers obviously love your work. You're selling plenty of books, but I think the writers, one of the reasons why we get attracted to your work is things like you can feel the details of Sam Hatton um, under the surface, right? So, especially with, and I keep coming back to Little Russia because that's one of the things that made me really think. I started thinking about, oh, okay, well, geographically, that's probably part of the town and part of the little thing. And then I started to think about, well, the high school that Daphne went to because I read that book and that book was very firm in my head. And these are things that I think attract other writers when they read the work, when they see like how much detail or thought you're putting into the background of these places. So um and so um I just really appreciate that, so I wanted to say that. Now,
Wow. Right on.
one of the great praises that you got for this came from Brian Evanson. And everyone who listens to my podcast or read my reviews know I think Brian Evanson is the best short story author going right now. I think nobody writes short stories better than Brian Evanson right now. And his praise for this collection really spoke to me because one of the things he talked about was how, with your commercial success, and especially with the success of things like Bird Box, you could be repeatedly doing like weird apocalypse novels that kind of like feed into the popularity of that. But this book has daring experimentation in the writing, and I think that one of the things that is evident in how you approach these novella collections is, you're willing to take risks. Now, that being said, you wrote Incidents Around the House in Pearl, right?
Yeah.
So I know you're willing to be daring and experimental in novels as well. But tell me about like thinking, oh, do you ever think this is a really weird idea? This is a novella. Do you have that thought?
No, not that thought, but I do have this is a smaller idea, which is sort of a boring answer to that question, right?
No,
Because
it's not. No, but I think writers need to understand where, when they're learning from you, like where you make that judgment. Like, where do you,
okay,
like,
okay, yeah, right,
yeah, like
okay,
take, for example, let's take Half the House is Haunted,
yep.
which is somewhat similar to Incidents Around the House, but
Yeah,
not.
that is the craziest thing to me. So I don't know. I think you and you and Neil from Talking Scared are the only two I've seen that pointed out that half the house almost acts as a preview or a first stab at incidents.
Right.
And I didn't the whole
You
time I
didn't
was
see it
writing
that way, right?
no, no, not at all. Like I
Right.
wrote half the house and I wrote and an Agranoff and all this, and then I'm working on incidents. And then when I was done with incidents and I like was talking about it to someone, I was like, oh, that's you know what?
They are kind
Wow.
of thematically.
The
Yeah.
first part, because for the listeners, the first novella, Half the House is Haunted, is broken up into three smaller sections. The opening part, our brother and sister, I don't know, I can't remember how old they are, but they're young, they're kids. So to write in the kid's voice. And it's dual narrators in that part. And so yeah, there was a sense, a warm-up for that. Now, the thing that interests me about that is this. So I wrote Goblin, and then when I was thought I was done, I added one more novella to it. And in that novella, the a mix up at the zoo. The zookeeper has these crazy dreams, and the crazy dreams are pretty long. They're all written in italics, present tense, da 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 da. And after writing that novella, I said to myself, "Oh, I would like to do a whole novel like this." And then I wrote Bird Box in that exact style as the dream sequence from A Mix Up at the Zoo. The point is, I do have a history of a quote unquote warm
Warm
up
up. Yeah.
novella that leads to like a novel, but that doesn't hopefully that doesn't undermine A Mix Up at the Zoo or Half the House is Haunted.
Oh no, no, not at all. In what I think in Half the House is Haunted has kind of it has a very different message from Incidents, so it kind of goes a different way. At least the message that I took from it, which we're probably going to talk more about in spoilers.
Sure.
But one of the things that I think will fascinate people or interest people is that idea of like, where do you choose? Like, this is a smaller idea, and this is because Half the House is Haunted is one that I could see being a novel. However, I think it's more effective at the length that it is. So I'm
Oh,
wondering if you,
you're making me wish I did it that way. I'm over here like, oh God, maybe I should have. Because I could see that too now, like especially the middle section. Oh my gosh, you could have spent a lot more time when they're like 40 years old and she's
Mhm.
like living alone in the place, and he's like, "Hey, how you doing, Steph?" And she's like, "Oh, great, everything's great." And you're like, "No, it's not."
Well,
And
and I think you could a film adaptation of that story could explore that, and also filmmakers like that's one that could be done on the cheap, by the way,
no
and
doubt,
be very
no
atmospheric and
doubt.
effective.
I feel like most of my better stuff is that way, by the way. I
Yeah.
really anyway, go on though. Go on.
Well, and like Argyle, for example, is one that immediately when I read Argyle, I thought, now that's a horror film that could be made on a shoestring budget right
Oh
there.
yeah. Oh
With
yeah.
it would be entirely dependent on performance and
Oh yeah.
casting,
Yep.
but you could not do that without the right actors. But I think yes, you could have done a longer version of it, but also the way it works. And at least I don't know, for me as a writer, like a lot of times if I decide a short story or a novel, it's like, is this a story I want to live with for a week reading it, right? Or is this a story that is better in one sitting where I can get down and really like, and I think with Half the House is Haunted, that the way, and people are going to have to read it and then come back for the spoilers to see what I entirely talking about. But part of one of the reasons why Half the House is Haunted works as a short piece is because it has a like, oh shit, that's what was happening kind of thing to it. And in one sitting, that can be really, really effective, right?
I see what you're saying. Whereas an entire novel would feel like you had the rug pulled out, maybe, possibly.
Possibly.
Possibly. If you were sitting with
Now,
that like a week or something, and then you're like, no, it could still work though. It
it
could
could
still
still
go.
work. I'm just saying for me, that's one of the reasons why. And
Yeah.
I think that sometimes we make these decisions like, does the story work this way or that way? And Argyle is one that I'm gonna get into a little bit more in this in the spoilers, but um, I think that you got a really creepy setup here. This idea that this dying man says to his kids, like, "Hey, the greatest accomplishment of my life is that I didn't do all the terrible things that I wanted to do." Speaking to somebody who has had a parent die, like I don't know how I would feel if I was in that situation. And you know, I mean, the worst my dad
Yeah.
did in the last couple of days before he died was say, "What's so bad about Ben Roethlisberger?" And I was like, I was like, "Oh, Dad,
Oh man.
yeah,
Well,
you're
first of
really
all,
not there anymore, are you?" And but so Argyle, like, tell me a little bit about this in a nutshell.
okay. So I was with a friend years ago, and we were watching the news, and I can't remember exactly what crime it was right now, but something it was bad. Someone did something bad, and they were being carted off to jail, and it was something bad. And I was like, oh God, this guy's going to jail. And my friend was like, he goes, man, thank God I'm not wired like that. And I'm like, wait, what are you talking about? And he goes, oh God, thank God I'm not wired like this. He's like, this guy didn't want to be wired this way.
Right.
You know what? Whether whatever the crime was, it violated someone. I can't remember in what way, and I'm trying to be like tasteful about not remembering that. But point is my friend pointed out that rather than say this monster, which we both agree this guy was a monster, he was like, man, thank freaking God I'm not built that way, you know? And I was like, wow, what an interesting way of looking at this, man. Years later, because I would think about that all the time, you know? It's not necessarily an empathetic way of looking at a criminal. It's more like and like
Yeah.
we understand that a serial killer, that kind of thing is typically abused or whatever. I don't know how many are like actually, I just don't know how many are just born that way. In this case, is I think it's fair enough to assume that Sean was like is wired this way
Yeah.
and chose to try to resist it his entire life, which is obviously a noble pursuit. The fact that I haven't not killed someone is not so noble considering I've never had any desire to do so.
Right.
Sean Hasbro, if he pulls that off in his life, that would be incredibly noble because he wanted to all the time. But the fact that he wanted to all the time is incredibly not noble. So right. So I for a long time now I'm like, oh, this is a great novella idea. You got a guy in the deathbed that's like, hey, everybody, listen to what I didn't do.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things, like I said earlier, one of the things I think is great about it is that I just kept immediately thinking about, oh, I immediately was like, oh, I would love to see this adapted, like as a low budget, like kind of like this would almost be something you could do as like a dollar baby type of thing, right? Because like it's all dependent on performance. Like it's a one room, like, oh, you could do this as a play, really.
I thought that
Honest.
same thing recently. Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't, if this is spoiling something, there is film traction on Argo.
Oh, good.
There
Yeah.
is. And the conversations are similar to what you are saying right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
And yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why it makes sense because yeah, the same reason why and another novella from a horror master, but like that's one of the reasons why Good Marriage made sense, right? Like the Stephen King, because it all comes down to that creepy thing of like who is in your house, you know,
Yeah.
and like what could they be, and another really great exploration of like a similar concept. And you know, just that's a creepy factor that doesn't require any special effects, just a great performance.
No, it's funny that you say this because in that film conversation, I said by nature of what Sean is, by nature of what Sean is resisting, he's saving us a lot of money in special effects.
Right, right, exactly.
Because he's not doing the things he wants to do.
Right.
Yeah, he's I think that and we've talked about this before, one of the beauties of being a prolific artist or prolific writer, whatever it might be, is that eventually you can start writing stories from points of view that you don't even like agree with. Like I
Yeah.
don't jive with Sean Hasbro. Like I don't feel the same way this dude does.
Yeah.
I completely get on with Dado in incidents. Like it's completely Sean Hasbro. Like no, I don't. I get a
Yeah.
I relate to him as much as you do,
Right.
and so that was really fun for me too, to
Yeah.
like sit down and write a guy that, and it doesn't mean that like of course you don't you know of course, it's not like of course you don't like the bad guy. That's no. We're talking about something deeper than that right now. We're talking about instincts and what this guy wants to do, and and so for me, how fun to sit down with a guy that like wanted to do all these things, but it was also like a little dark, like going through that in the especially listeners when he encounters a guy named Randy Scotts and the just the interactions. It's almost like meeting a guy on like the fringe of the cosmos or meeting a guy in like a dark pocket of the of existence or not like the devil but like a vampire meeting a vampire or a heroin addict meeting a heroin addict or like whatever it might be like that like-minded we are existing in the shadows kind of thing and Sean is inspired by this guy all this to say that writing Sean Hasbro was super refreshing for me
Mm.
because it's not how I think but it was also a dark place to go to.
Well, I had the same experience in Last Night to Kill Nazis, the Hitler's secretary. And actually, she was the key to the book for me. Like, until I had her, um, like, the book didn't make a ton of sense. And just today, I saw somebody wrote a very long review on Goodreads where they were totally focused on her as a character in the review. And it's really refreshing when somebody's like, and I'm like, ha, they got it, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
It,
yeah.
and I think one of the reasons why I think writing a character like Sean Hasbro in that sense is kind of liberating too, is because that's where you're really using your imagination on, like, I can write like a mom or a dad, and like, writing Dado, it's easy to get into, like, I understand what he's feeling,
Right.
he's interacting with Bella, but like having to actually think about somebody, and that's one of the reasons why I like writing science fiction, which is a excellent segue if I do say so myself. Um, why I like writing science fiction is because you have to think about, you know, things that are not normal, and one of the things I'm always like, that I always like kind of get mad at Star Trek for not taking advantage of is, you have a character beaming down onto a planet. They've been on a spaceship for months. This is their first time in open air, and they don't comment on, whew, wow, that fresh air feels great, right? Like, you just think about like what they're doing, right? And
That would literally be all we talked about.
well, I to a degree, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. So Doug and Judy buy the house washer. This is my favorite story in the collection.
Wow, awesome. Great.
I may not. I absolutely loved Jupiter Drop. I was super impressed with it. That's why I wrote you right away and said I love that. However, the story that I think is the best in there is Doug and Judy buy the house washer.
Oh,
Now,
this is amazing. Thank you.
now, keep in mind, you're talking to a guy with Philip K. Dick on his shirt right now, a guy who does a podcast about Philip K. Dick, and this story is, and I know I said this in my review. I don't want to be accused of seeing Philip K. Dick in everything and the clouds, but um, I can make a very strong argument for many things that make this story Dickian, and very PKD. But I'm wondering where this story came from for you, before I color it with my PKD commentary.
Okay, amazing. This is all wonderful to hear. So Allison and I met, I was living in an apartment. We lived there for a few months, and then we moved into a house, and it's the first house like I ever like really moved into, and her too, and we were renting it still, but it was like a real house, you know? And when we were, I think it was like in the first week we were there or something, we were standing in like an empty living room, and we were standing next to each other, and I was like, "Hey, imagine if we could buy a house washer that like literally like so you and I just stood right here in like a tube or something, and the rest of the house because it felt like a lot to clean, and even though we had only like it felt like this was gonna take some work living here." And I was like, so imagine you and I are just in a glass tube, and the rest of the house is filled with this solution. Every single thing in the house is cleaned in its own way. The drapes, the books, the photo albums, the tables, the chairs, the floors, the windows, everything in its own odd way from this solution. While you and I just stand right here and wait for it to be done in an hour and we step out. And then I'm a horror author. At the end, it became, well, wait, hold on. What if the deeds of our lives start floating around us in this tube, and the way that we got to where we start to see these things, and oh wait, what if we start to see like shapes out there, So I must have thought of that story 10 years ago.
Right.
And there are two stories. Another one I finished recently, that I thought in that period. But I'm starting to work on like novellas, and I had Daphne and Half the House, and I think Igorov and the Jupiter Drop. Right, Doug and Judy was the last one I wrote actually for this, and um and I was like, oh, the house washer, and I was like, Allison, remember that house washer idea? And she's like, yeah, whatever. And it was, oh, it was such a thrill. They're obviously unlikable characters, but they're so unlikable that I freaking I loved writing them. That's not the same to me as Sean. Sean, that was different. But anyway, that's where the idea came from.
So, do you want to hear a Phil Dick expert explain what is Philip K. Dick about this story as quickly as I can?
Absolutely.
Okay, so first off, the technology. Um, uh, Phil didn't care if the technology in his stories made actual physical sense, um, right? So
Yeah.
sometimes, like the technology would just operate in crazy and ridiculous ways. And one of the things is if you sat down and tried to actually figure out how the house washer physically worked or
Yeah.
all these things, it would hurt your brain. And I loved that Phil like didn't care. If he was
Yes.
going to tell a story, if you really try to get into the science of Ubik, for example,
Oh
it,
man.
it doesn't work. But if you go into this story and say, I'm just going with it, I'm going with the surreal nature of what it's trying to tell me, that's a very Dickian thing. The One of the things that Philip K. Dick is underrated for is his sense of humor, right? And this is a very funny story. It's not just that these guys are assholes. And, of course, keeping up with the Joneses is a theme throughout much of Phil's work because he always had working class characters, right? Now, he always had rich protagonists. This is part of his formula. But, keeping up with the Joneses is a huge part of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, right? And so you have that. And you also have like the fact that they constantly say things like, well, for the amount of money we paid for it, over and over and over again. If Phil found a good joke, he was going to hammer it home and he was going to use it. So that's one
Yeah.
of the things that I thought was very Dickian about
Oh,
it.
that's awesome. Wow.
And also, the fact that once everything starts coming up and coming around, like one of the things that happens in the story is these elements of their lives as they're trapped inside this technology that the elements of what make them human and make them tick are thrown in their faces. Very Dickian concept. So I could have gone more into this in my review, but I had hoped that we could do this in the discussion because I do have one of my co-hosts on Dickheads. We have a segment we call Dick Like Suggestion, and it's funny because I was telling him like, oh, and he's a fan of your work too, and I said, oh, I'm going to be doing one of Malerman's novellas for Dick Like Suggestion in a future episode.
Oh,
And he
amazing.
made me explain why. And he said, because sometimes he says I stretch the Dick Like Suggestion thing.
Sure.
And he was like, okay, I get it. And
Awesome.
then
Awesome.
so I do think the story, and yeah, maybe I spoiled some things, but I don't think the story can be spoiled.
Right, exactly.
This one I don't think can be spoiled because it's
I'm with
about
you.
the execution and it's about the things that go on in the story. It's a very funny story. It's very Dickian. I could tell whether it was conscious or not that you're a Ubik fan by reading it, because um just the nature of the surreal, I don't give a fuck of it. Uh
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, but
and so
the
so
non-hard for the non-hard with the flaccid sci-fi fan, for the non-hard sci-fi fan, it's like, one of the reasons I love horror is that I don't have to explain the exact reason that the world went dark, like this, or how the sun died. The world just went dark, right?
yeah.
And so, right. So to the first point of your PKD examination is yes, like just for the duration of the story, just trust that it works.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just
um
trust that it works. And like it's so
there has
fun.
never ever been an explanation for why Tagomi goes between universes in Man in the High Castle, and Phil has specifically said, "I don't know.
Yeah, no, right, right. And that's
I don't
that's
know.
how I would do. Right. Same thing. Yeah.
You
And
don't
it's
have
just
to know."
I feel like Harlan Ellison's a bit like that too, from what I've read of him. Anyway,
Yeah,
I don't know if he vacillated or anything, but from what
yeah,
I've read of him, like he's like that too, where it's like just go with me on this.
yeah. Barry Maltzberg, very much so too, and a lot of the new wave authors. That's one of the hallmarks of the new wave,
Oh,
and
cool.
it's one of the reasons why it's my favorite era of science fiction. But continuing on the science fiction thing, um, Jupiter Drop is it. Okay, so this is the most science fiction story of yours that I've read. It's not hard sci-fi. Again, it's pretty surreal. Um, there's a way to look at it other ways, and it's funny because in my notes for talking about Jupiter Drop for this podcast, I just wrote "oh boy" at the beginning, like here we go, because this story made me. I said this before. This isn't a secret. I've wanted you to write a science fiction novel. You flirted with it a little bit with Inspection. There's ways there's things where you can look at it and say, this is sci-fi adjacent. This is sci-fi horror. This is, I mean, Bird Box could be looked at it that way. But um, I'm very excited to see you go into space. Where did Jupiter Drop come from? Of
Wow. Man,
course, I'm asking that. I know that's a
I
hard question. I can
I
see on your
don't
face.
remember with that one. I had an answer for each of these other ones, and I do not remember with that one. I remember obviously, like, an early on, like an aerial view of the drop itself and falling through a gas planet. And like, okay, how the hell is this going? Well, it's gonna have to be a hell of an apartment, right? And it's gonna have to have like jets and come on.
Yeah.
It's almost like ridiculous, but it's so awesome, the concept, right? I mean, not meaning mine, but just the idea of like experiencing the inside of Jupiter sounds like so thrilling, right? I don't remember exactly where that one came from, but that
But see, and I'm assuming when Brian Evanson was talking about the daring experimentation with this book, he was either talking about Doug and Judy or he was talking about Jupiter Drop, because these are the stories where I feel like you're not giving a fuck, right? You're just like
yeah.
telling a story as weird as you want to tell it and just saying, like, okay, it's an apartment, it's dropping through Jupiter. He gets
Yeah.
there. He gets there somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He gets
And right. And you know, I quoted the bowels of Jupiter is a storm, the endless, only sounds now, only the music they made. So like it really seemed like you were wanting to write about like being in that maelstrom of Jupiter, that
yeah,
seemed like part of the inspiration.
100%. Like this the sense I mean, in a weird way, the Jupiter drop's a lot like Doug and Judy, right? They're in this
Yeah.
glass tube as this, and they're seeing like shapes out in the solution. And now you got Steve, I think his name's Steve, right? Yeah, Steve
Yeah.
in the glass apartment, and he's surrounded by, you could argue it's like a total gazillion time expansion of that same solution. Shapes out there, what's out there, my past, blah, blah, blah. Which I thought was a brilliant idea of Trisha's at Del Rey to suggest those two stories next to each other.
Yeah.
I would have been like, no, of course you don't want the two ballads next to each other on the album, or you don't want the two rockers, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
But there was something about it. It was almost like she was saying, no, now we go here for a while, and
Yeah.
then we come back with Igorov. And I thought that was her idea, and I thought it was brilliant. Yes,
Yeah.
the most appealing thing 100% was, I guess, not to say that you're at peace because he's not, but to have a stable unit in the center of this mythically violent storm.
And what he's got mythically violent like regrets that he's
Yeah.
dealing with. And so I always say storytelling to me is um uh I'm brain farting that parallels and reversals, right? And so the parallel of what Jupiter Drop is built on is the parallel of what he's going through emotionally with the most violent, chaotic part of our solar system, right? you know,
Yep. Yep.
and just like that to me is what makes that a great story.
Okay, real fast. I don't mean to interrupt, but it's exciting to me, the scope of Jupiter, this like unfathomable size and storms and this, and then zoop, shrink down to Steve's actual regret, how small the incident was that went wrong.
Yeah,
He just like nicked the guy, like just nicked him with the front of his car, and the guy sort of like, I don't want to like spoil it, I guess, but the guy sort of like falls over or whatever.
yeah,
The accident, it wasn't like he was in some terrible accident. He wasn't drunk driving, like something like that. It's so little what happened. So little. Now put that experience in a guy in the middle of Jupiter. And that's I think the minuscule nature of what he regrets makes Jupiter seem even freaking bigger.
yeah. Which is yeah. Which, by the way, they just found lava lakes on Io, which
Oh, really?
yeah, super metal. Yeah, they just confirmed that there's lakes of lava on Io, and look, and for me, like as an astronomy nerd, like the coolest thing I ever did with a telescope was be able to track moons crossing Jupiter with my personal telescope. I have a love for looking at Jupiter, and so the story meant a lot to me. Any science fiction related to that planet, realistic, unrealistic, surreal, unsurreal. Like you don't have to be Arthur C. Clarke getting everything right as he knew it to make a
Yeah.
good story out of Jupiter. It's it's the second largest object in our solar system. It's a big deal, you know, and uh, you know, I love that. So now the last novella of the piece, and then we'll talk about incidents a little bit. Um, Igorov is a very solid character piece, and the concept of the triplets who lose one of their brothers, and like kind of get set off on this revenge mission. I had a feeling that like the image of two brothers that lose an identical triplet brother like felt like a kernel that starts a story.
Yeah, 100%. That one started there, 100%. Yeah, the terrible man, this is for the listeners. Terrible man murders a guy not knowing that he is one of triplets, and the two remaining brothers get their revenge by pretending to be the ghost of their slain brother. So
Yeah.
they try to drive the old man Igorov mad.
Mm.
And this takes place, for the listener, this takes place in Little Russia, Sam Haddon, a neighborhood, a kind of big neighborhood though of Sam Haddon.
Right. And it's interesting that the mileage will vary for people because it's funny because I've seen some people like kind of I've seen a couple reviews that focused on some of the other novellas, and then I saw one the other day that was like, "This is the novella. This is the one that got me."
Did you?
And
That's great. That's great. By the way, not to whatever, but it's my favorite one.
yeah,
Yeah.
and what for me, there are two things about this novella that really sung to me about it, and it's funny. I think I was getting tired when I wrote the review on last Friday night when it was late. So I think I gave Igorov not as much attention as I probably should have. But two of the things that really caught me was there's a part where the father says, "I've already lost one son. Don't want to lose any other." You know, when he's like, "I know you're thinking about revenge."
Yeah.
I thought that was a really powerful moment of the novella that really kind of solidified the characters for me. And what was interesting is because I think when I was reading it, the setup I thought was neat, and I thought with the brothers and that whole thing, but I really got interested in the story by feeling that father's fear in that moment, right? And because before I really think sometimes you're looking for the hook that connects you to a story, and for me, that was the hook. Um, and this concept that they're, pretending to be the ghost was, it's funny because when it started, and I was like, I didn't know where it was going, and the triplets, and then I was like, oh God, why has no one ever done this before? With even just with a twin.
Oh, I know. Even with that twin, I know, dude. I know. How has this not been done? This is like one of those moments where it's like your friend makes a joke and you're like, dude, that joke was sitting here for 10 years and I never saw it. That's how I felt about Igorov. I was like, dude, oh, whoa. Sorry about this. I don't know. Did you hear that? Did everyone hear
No, it's fine. Yeah.
that? Anyway, yeah, it just felt like this has been here this whole time.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, and I think that's what makes that novella is like one of the things about it is like it's such an obvious concept. It's hard to believe that it's never been done before. And that was I was talking to a friend
You
about
just
it
said
and
something interesting, and I might do something insane. You just said even with a twin, that's never been done. And I think I might write that story. I think I'm gonna write a story which is exactly the premise of Eager Eye, but in a different way, where a twin is murdered and the other twin pretends to be his ghost. And I think I might do that.
yeah,
I've never done
why
that.
not? Yeah,
Right? Why not? That's complete absurdism, and I love it. Talk about experimental. Like write the same story you just wrote,
story in
but
a different way.
shrink it
But
now.
you'll have different settings. You want to have the Russian
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, you
yeah.
could do a whole
Oh, I
yeah, and
love that.
look, my mom was a twin and
No way.
and
Wow.
my mom was a twin and she died when she was 46 and my aunt's still alive in her 80s and
Oh.
yeah, it's a really when I talk to my aunt about what it means to have lost and they were identical enough that my aunt took the driver's test for
Oh
my mom
my.
and so there's a lot of really interesting things about that kind of like lost limb thing that goes on with the twin you know and like you still think that the limb is there, right? So yeah, no, I look forward I look forward to that story.
Wow, that what you just said is also you should write that. You should write about that. Also, I'm just sorry to yeah, in the course of this conversation, I've heard about your mom and your dad, and I'm sorry to hear that.
Oh well, yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make it about me, but
No, 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 I
yeah,
wanted to point out that I noticed that, I suppose. I'm sorry to hear
yeah,
that.
well look and I don't always do that, but I guess I do. Josh, I really do feel very personally connected to your work in a lot of ways. So I do think in a lot of ways. I think that you do a really good job of creating characters where the reader will be thinking about how this relates to things that they think about for their lives. A good writer who's good at characters will do that. You know, but speaking of, we've already gone pretty long, and I do want to talk a little bit, at least to make sure that we sell
I
incidents around the
yeah,
house.
let's do that. But I just want to say it one more time. Hold me to it. I'm writing that twin story because that is it's almost like that's almost more Philip K. Dick than anything. Is you wrote the story of the triplets, and now you're like, you know what? Hold on, watch me throw the ball down the plate again. I'm gonna do the same story with just twins.
Well,
That's
and
that's
you know about Philip K. Dick and his twin sister, right?
no.
No, she died when they were 6 months old,
Oh
and
yeah, yeah. No, I didn't know that. Yeah.
yeah, and Alfonso Cuarón is actually making a movie about his twin sister Jane.
Wow.
Yeah, and
Oh man, that has to talk about a phantom limb. Oh boy.
yeah, he Jane is like a persistent psychological drama in Phil's life, like his whole life, right? And that's and now filmmakers making a biopic about his sister who never existed,
No, that's
right?
yeah, that's very Phil K. Dick.
Exactly. Yeah. So Incidents Around the House, for people who don't know, this is a novel, comes out in June, I think.
Yep,
Yep.
June 25th.
Yeah. And there's a lot of buzz about it because there's copies floating around of the arc, and I'm lucky enough to have one of those back there on the shelf. And thank you for that.
Yeah,
And you know, look, F. Paul Wilson is one of my favorite horror writers. And one of the things that F. Paul Wilson does is he's really good at misdirection, at making you think this novel is a vampire novel. No, it's really not. Or this is a haunted house novel. No, it's really not. And one of the things that, you look at the title, you're going to think Incidents Around the House is a haunted house novel. Well, no, it's not. Not entirely. Not really. It's not a haunted house novel in
it's
a
really
sense.
not.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's a very, very, very creepy novel. But one thing we can talk about, and it's really hard to dance around spoilers with this book, is that it's entirely written from the point of view of Bella, who's what, 8 years old, nine
Yep.
years old,
Hey,
yeah,
yep. Yes.
and I told you before we started recording, it's kind of like writing a found footage movie basically as a novel. And I hate gimmicks like this usually because most authors cheat. And I was honest with you that I was like prepared to find the cheats. And one of the things that I immediately said the first time I commented on this book was, God damn it, Malerman, you did it. You didn't cheat. How hard was it to write that many pages without cheating the concept? Or were you just so excited about writing the concept that it was easy? Was it hard? Was it easy?
I'd say maintaining Bella's point of view was easy. Getting her language right was not.
Yeah.
And so not cheating. In terms of the cheating, because I know exactly what you mean. I feel like Dado is a like a release valve, like a vent for me. Mommy, not so much, but Dado especially, and even Grandma Ruth. In that they have, obviously an 8-year-old wouldn't remember verbatim Dado's whole monologue on kindness or mindfulness, but we get it. She hears it.
Yeah.
And as you said, that doesn't mean that she understands it all, and that's how you remain from cheating. So I totally know what you mean when you're saying it. I don't know that I necessarily think of things in those terms. I mean, meaning while writing. But her language, though, oh my God. To go through the whole draft and then you start and you're like, okay, now let's rewrite. And you're like, what an early sentence is like, mother sat beside me upon the couch. And I'm like, wait, hold on, wait, what? Mother? beside me, upon, you know what I mean? Like, all right, like every, like, it was like right away, it was like, oh boy. And it's not a matter of dumbing it down. That's not what it is. It's just, you got her voice, and now you got to stay in this voice. And you got how much she understands of what her parents say, and you got to stay with she understands that how much. The first, the outline of this book is written on the office wall behind this computer. I'm looking up and looking at it right now.
Mhm.
It's written on the wall behind this computer. And the very first line says, at the time, I didn't know what I was doing yet. It says, can a 5-year-old narrate an entire novel without being unreliable? So, from the word go, one of the main tenets, one of the main rules of Incidents Around the House is that Bella is not unreliable. What she sees is real, and her parents see it soon enough that they know it's real. This book is not about whether or not this exists. This book is not about convincing someone that it exists. This book is dealing with what exists.
Yeah.
And
And
that to me was that was the ultimate foundational rule, is that Bella is to be believed.
right. And one of the things that, when I was reading it, and I try to go into things as cold as possible. So I didn't read anything about, once I have an author I trust, like you, um, like when I read Pearl, I didn't read anything about it, right? When I read, you know, when I read, all the novellas in Spin and Black Yarn, I never read anything about them. And so Incidents Around the House, all I knew was the title and um, the guy who wrote it, right? And so 5-10 pages into it, I said to myself, God, there's no way he can keep this up for a whole book. How long is this? And then I started flipping through to see, like, oh shit, this is the whole thing.
Like you were, so you were actually wondering, like maybe part two is like Dado's point of view or something.
Right, right. And so I
Oh,
didn't when I
interesting.
was a couple pages in, I thought to myself, okay, this will be like the first 20 pages or the first 10 pages, or this will be the prologue, and then we'll
Right.
get Dado's point of view, and we'll get
Oh, I
like,
see.
and I just thought you were doing atmosphere for the beginning. And then when I realized, oh shit, he's doing this for the whole goddamn thing, then I was like, oh, this is very different. And then I said to my wife, I started explaining the concept, and she was like, well, that's going to be really hard to write. And I said, well, and then on top of it, this is the one that you had a film crew watching you write too, isn't it?
No, no, no,
No,
no,
that's a
no,
different one.
no, no, no. Not only that, I mean, I shot a documentary of the novel I wrote right after this.
Oh, okay.
Honest to God, I am so glad, because when I sat down to do Incidents, I considered it, because the idea to document writing a novel I've had for a few years. Sat
Yeah.
down and writing. I'm so glad that sorry, that there were no cameras or this or that. With that book, not only was there no crew or cameras or anything. I typically write every novel to horror soundtracks, to music. Most of us do, right? To write to some
Yeah.
sort of music, whatever. And I couldn't really like find the right music. And then I was like, you know what? Hold on. Let's just. What about writing a novel to silence? Have you tried that? And so Incidents Around the House is the first time I wrote a book to like the silence of the house at like from 9 at night till like 1 in the morning, whatever it was. And we're talking about a dark, quiet house with cats in the other room, like making little like noises, and like wind against the windows. And it
Mm,
was, I can't even imagine if there were cameras rolling. It wouldn't have ended up being what it is. The book after turned out to be perfect for that.
yeah.
So
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, and just the whole idea of this, when Brian Evanson said, and I'll keep coming back to this because I think it's incredible praise. You get that kind of praise for Brian Evanson. I want to hammer that home too. But one of the
Yeah,
things he's
let me just throw this out there. Like, yes, I agree with you. And that dude is brilliant. And I just read Good Night, Sleep Tight, his newest like story collection and
yeah,
blurb. And I was, man, oh my God, is it good? And I was writing him as I was reading each one and like writing him what I thought about, like, oh my God, this one and that one. And just what a freaking thinker in his interactions, in his stories, in his posts, in
Yeah.
his yearly roundups of what he's read, in his stories about his son, like like posts about his kid and everything. Like that dude is brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just
Absolutely.
wanted to throw, you brought him up a few times. I wanted to point out, like, yeah, I'm with you, man. I
Yeah.
love that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think Brian, you know, is the best short story writer that we've got. Like this, I feel the same way about him that I did about Clive Barker when I was growing up, right? As far as like just, and it's not that I don't think Brian's novels are good, because I think Immobility is fantastic. It's one of my favorites, but I just think in the short form, he just, yeah, just great. But one of the things he said about you in relation to Spin a Black Yarn was that you don't have to be bold or daring and do these things. And I think about Pearl and incidents around the house together in the sense of what he was saying, because both Pearl and Incidents Around the House are novels where, on the surface, if you tell somebody what Pearl's about, most people are going to say that's not going to work,
Yeah,
right?
that was ridiculous. Yep.
Yes. And I read it cold, so I didn't know what the plot was.
Girl,
But
man.
if you had told me ahead of time, this is what the plot of the novel is going to be, I would have been like, give me a break. That's never going to work. And and it does. And one of the things about Pearl and Instance Around the House is that um, using the child's point of view should be impossible to make a whole novel work. But what's different about that than Pearl is that it makes the concept work, because a child puts you as close to the fear of this horror novel as you could possibly get. Yes, it is a frightening situation for parents. I said about this book that this would be a terrifying novel to read for first time parents, in the first like year or two of their kid's life. Um, but by putting it in Bella's voice, the fear of, is this entity real? Is this incident real? In a child's voice, just puts you as close to that fear as possible. And no horror story works if you cannot put yourself in the shoes of the character. I don't care how good it is. And so, you know, we've been saying, back to supernatural horror and literature by Lovecraft.
Mhm.
He didn't say it in so many words, but like one of the things that makes Lovecraft's fiction not age so well is it's hard to put yourself in, frozen tundra and looking at giant frozen cities or whatever. But what puts you right here in this story is everyone remembers being a child. And so when you're reading this, it puts you at ground zero. So that's my pitch to everyone. Make sure you pre-order Instance Around the House, because you want to read this as soon as possible to not have the world spoil it for you, because you know um and that's why it's such a hard book to review. But
It
I
really
don't.
is. It's a hard book to discuss a little bit. And like I think I've only honestly, David, I think I've only like talked about this like with one other person, two other people so far, maybe.
Yeah.
And like in an interview setting. And like I'm discovering right away, like there's only so much you can say. Because if we start to talk beyond like sort of the midpoint of the book, it's like everything is a spoiler.
Yeah.
Not, and I don't want to give the impression that there's some like Agatha Christie like twists involved. It's not like that. It's just in terms of like there's a mood to it. I hope there's an atmosphere to it. I hope that to give too much information away I don't know, condense that or change that experience or something. It's not like we're withholding some unbelievable twist from you.
No.
It just it's more like not wanting to screw around with the mood.
Yeah, and there's discoveries to be had. So, is there anything else you want to say about incidents before we get into we're only going to have a little bit of spoilers for Spin and Black Yarn because we've talked a lot. We went into some of the things I wanted to that I had in my notes. Is there anything else you want to say about incidents to before it comes out?
Yeah, sure. I think this is my 13th book published now, and Dado is there with for me, Mallory from Bird Box, Camp from Goblin, maybe Carol herself from Unmarried Carol, in terms of characters that were so easy to write for me, so fluid to write, where I didn't even have to like consider like, oh, what would she say? What would he say? Mallory's the easiest character I've ever written.
Yeah,
And Dado was right there where it was like, I'm not quite as easygoing as Dado. I'm more anxious. I'm more, I don't know the right word. I'm a little more angular, not mean or but just a little more like you know. He's a little more laid back. He's a little more hippie, a little bit. And but there was just something about him where I'm like, if I lived up the street from this guy and I, we'd be watching basketball every night. And I absolutely loved writing Dado. I loved writing this book, and I just wanted to say that, I suppose. Again,
yeah,
haven't talked about the book much at all, and and thank you for allowing me to, and for the listeners to know that, man, that I love writing this book. So, yep.
yeah. Well, and that comes down to the whole thing of you being a writer's writer is that um and it was funny because on my best books of the year podcast or best movies of the year. So last year, my number two movie of the year was Bird Box Barcelona. And there's a funny moment in the podcast where one of the guys on my panel, Anthony Trevino, who I wrote Nightmare City with, I said at one point, I said, well, I find that Josh Malerman is very underrated. And then Anthony went, underrated. He's like, everyone I know likes his work. And then I said, hey, what I mean is his skill and ability as a writer. Everyone talks about how Josh's books are satisfying. I hear a lot about that. But what I don't hear a lot about is what a magician of construction and narrative you are. And so I want to say that. And that is what I think is underrated. And what I liked about, and I said this to you before we were recording, one of the reasons why I liked Bird Box Barcelona so much is it put back some of the narrative trickery of the first 75 pages of Bird Box that
Yep,
I
I
think is
agree.
missing.
Yep.
And that's the Dickian in me as well. All right, so this is your warning for everybody. We're going to do a short spoiler section on um, Spin a Black Yarn. And so now we're in spoilers, and I want to talk about Half the House is Haunted for sure, because one of the things that to me, okay, I want to know if I am reading this story correct, because here's what I think that story is about. And I know there's a certain amount of like readers are allowed to interpret things to a certain degree. But to me, Half the House is Haunted. And where it's different from Instance Around the House is that I don't think there's a real haunting. I think what's happening is that the sister's fucking with the brother, and this idea is the haunting, right? Like he's haunted by this thing, and by her saying half the house is haunted, and his whole life is kind of like it's the idea that haunts him. Now, am I reading this correctly, or am I just having a creative interpretation? Because that's kind of
We're in full spoiler country now, right?
we're in
I can say
full
it.
spoiler country.
Um, hmm, how to answer that question? I think. I think ultimately, and this is gonna sound like I'm running for office, but it's true. What matters is she's all about facing your fear, as you
Yeah.
know from the letter at the end and the book that she read, in the library. I think the book's called Fear, by the way.
Right.
Am I right? Is that what it was?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I think
And
so.
then I think
Because
so
that
too.
because it made me think of L. Ron Hubbard because
Yeah,
he
no,
wrote that
I know,
book.
I know, I know.
Yeah.
So, like, doesn't matter if it's real or not. I don't know. But what does matter is that literally the woman devoted her life to facing fear
Right.
and including, I'm going to put my brother through this so that he has to face it. I'm facing it myself. And I guess she understood at an early age. I'm going to put him through the same thing.
Yeah.
That's what matters most. That's a bit political of an answer, meaning I didn't really answer, but it also is the truth, is that that's what matters.
Right. And so she had that for him, but do you think that that ended up creating the psychological problem for her brother because he was focused on this, what half of the house is haunted? What.
Yeah, I think that man, can you imagine a sister like that growing up? Like, and listeners, for the listeners, I mean, I guess supposedly somebody probably read it already. If they like,
Yeah, we're in spoiler country. If
right,
they
we're in part of the country. Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I don't know. This is a hard one for me to answer. Like, if you really want to know what I think there is something in the house, and
Mm,
I think that she either became aware of that or maybe believed it after reading this book, Fear, whatever it is. But either way, she believes that half the house is haunted.
right.
Right.
Okay, now Argyle. And just so everyone knows that I'm not just blowing smoke up your ass to like that I can be critical if I think something, I there is the one tiny criticism I had for any of these stories in Argyle, there was a degree to me, and so I want to get your take on like why you went this direction. And you talked a little bit about this,
Oh, Randy
but
Scott's.
well, yes, because for me with Argyle, I thought the the scariest part was the kids sitting there and thinking like, holy shit, did my dad actually do this, or was he lying, or is he just making this up, is he just fucking with us? And the
Oh,
more stories that Sean told, I there was a degree that I felt like less was more, that I wanted him,
yes.
yeah, I wanted him to
Yeah.
create more
Okay. Okay.
more
Huh.
mystery. And I kind of saw like if I had written the story, now I'm not saying that this is the correct way, but if
No,
I
no,
had written the
no,
story,
I
I
love this.
probably would have focused more on the kids arguing like, is he crazy? Is he making this up? And it creating like a dynamic between the parents, like or between the kids. Like maybe one of the kids says, "You can't possibly believe him on this," or he's just going
That
crazy.
is, dude, Dave, that is super interesting, man. That did not cross my mind once. And then you saying that does sound like a great idea. And then it almost makes me feel like the kids right now feel like window dressing in the way that it is, which I guess well,
Well,
they're not, because they propel the whole what was the one event, Dad? What was the one time? Which one
yeah,
counted? Right. But I
but
didn't.
I'm interested in what you were, because you mentioned that it's like almost like a vampire meeting another vampire. So you were
Right.
trying to do something with, you wanted to show the
Yeah.
reason why you did what you did in the story is because you wanted to show what it was like for him to be tempted and to,
Yeah.
yeah.
100%. 100%. Yep.
So I
Exactly.
understand why you did what you did, but when I, as a writer reading, when I saw the setup, my mind was like, oh, he's going this direction. And then you went this other direction. And there's a
That's
part of me that
good. Wow.
spent a little bit of time thinking about both, you know,
No,
and
but I
and
do I do like your idea. Like just for the record, like I mean, I know you're not worried about criticizing. I'm remember, I'm one of two songwriters in a band for almost 30 years now. Like I am very used to
somebody
Hey,
saying that
that
riff
yeah,
sucks.
yeah, like that, like no, 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 that idea. Let's try this idea. Let's try, no, no, no. So I'm very used to this. Um, God, that is a good idea though. I get what you're saying because you could shrink the scope of Argon and it becomes scarier
Mhm.
what Sean has in him if the kids are debating what he has in him.
Well, and
Versus,
that's what in a
versus
film adaptation you could do, is because you could spend some time going that direction and then ultimately do the direction that you went, because
And then your also, by the way, your way is even more play-esque than the novella because the
yeah,
novella has all the cutaways to Randy Scott's and they go to where do they go? East Kent when
yeah,
they go that to the bar and he follows Argyle to the bathroom and all that. Like your way, I know you'd keep some of that probably, but your
yeah.
way shrinks some of that, increases the kids' roles, and
Mhm.
does become more of a singular, not a one act, but close to a
Well, and
single.
that's where I thought you were going, and that's one of the reasons why I'm saying, like, if anything in this book where I was like, I could have seen another direction,
That's
I
cool.
could have seen
Yeah.
that, and I just want to be clear because, like, I can sound a little hyperbolic when I talk about some of my writer friends, like, all the time, like Cody Goodfellow here in town. I think Cody's a genius, and like Cody has told me sometimes, he's like, I want to hear you say the parts that you don't like, so I know and I can trust you when you tell me, that you like the parts that you do.
Well,
And
I trust you either way, but I mean, we all get what he's saying when he says that. But I mean, I trust you either way, just like you trust me either way. But anyway, go
yeah,
on.
well, and so the whole thing with Argyle is that I you know I get which direction you're going, but I'm just saying that for me, like I was picturing everything at the bedside, like everything at the bedside.
Okay. So you actually are saying, see, that's fucking cool. So you
Yeah,
actually are saying, get rid of all cutaways and remain here.
right. Well, and I'm not saying that the cutaways don't have value, but I'm
No,
just
no, like
saying,
that, but that's fun. That's
yeah.
fun.
So
That,
so
like, let
while
me,
we're
can
on,
okay, sorry, go on.
no, and and to me, like, a lot of this is like,
Okay,
the conversations that readers and writers have, and in this case, as the reader, like, I can't help but try to be two steps ahead of a story when I'm reading it, going like, okay, where is this going? And the danger with writers is that sometimes you know the writer brain kicks in, and so you do that, and that's how we ended up with I Am Legend, by the way, because we had Richard Matheson watching Dracula and saying, well, one of these guys is scary. What if I reversed it?
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah,
what if I reversed it and there
yeah,
was only one of the humans,
yeah.
and then we have I Am Legend, right? And
I gotta reread that book, man. Oh God, I love that fucking book.
yeah, well, and I keep telling everyone with StokerCon this year, because it's not at the Hotel Dell, but for Richard Matheson fans, the Hotel Dell is a short bus ride away from the StokerCon Hotel, and that's where he wrote and Somewhere in Time takes place. So, like,
Wow.
yeah, it takes place at that
I read that. I
hotel,
read that book.
and he wrote it there. So I've always been
Also,
telling,
just a quick connection between us on this one is that it was filmed in Mackinac Island, Michigan.
right, right,
Yeah, at that
yeah,
Grand Hotel. Yeah, and I have been
but
there.
the hotel that it takes place at, or
Yeah,
the novel takes place at, is
yeah.
here. Um, yeah, but moving on. Sorry, I can't help but do sci-fi history and horror history.
No,
I like the history of the
I love
writers.
it. I love it.
But so just spoilers on Doug and Judy. And I want to get you to the Laker game. Or I should say the Nuggets game. Uh,
Yeah, it's definitely the Nuggets game.
yeah. Doug and Judy. So we kind of already kind of went through. We kind of spoiled that story a little bit, so I don't feel like I need to talk about that. But with Jupiter Drop and getting into the spoilers of, like, you know is he, like, when he gets to Jupiter and goes through this experience, and you were talking about how it's such a little incident, did you ever think about, and this is my question about it, did you ever think about making it a bigger thing? Or was it important to you that it was just like a tiny
Yeah,
thing that he
it
could
was.
poke through?
But instinctually, like it's not like I had some like scales of justice with him involved or something. Like instinctually, it was like I want this guy to be fixated on the like he's not a bad. It's not like he's a bad guy, or maybe he is in some other way, but not this way. Like this was the tiniest just misfortune, man. He nicked the guy. He was parking the car. The guy's doing his leaves, whatever he's doing. He nicked the guy. The guy sort of even looks over and I'm like, hey, it's all right. Falls, hits his head on a tree and dies.
Yeah.
And it's like, wait, what the just happened? I was just parking my car in the street. And then, but for me, that would be the equivalent of how small we are in the cosmos.
Right.
That would be the equivalent of that versus if I like went up and like intentionally murdered someone and then I'm like dealing with that falling through Jupiter. No, the real horror, you want to talk about the real horror, how small we are in the universe is how small an incident can lead to something so unfathomably unexpected and tragic. And so those are like mirrors of each other to me.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And so the cosmic scale of Jupiter is the parallel, right? It's the
Yep,
and it's the reversal in that regard. Um,
100%.
yeah, and it's look, anybody who listens to my podcast regularly is like I have certain friends that have joked that I should, if I got paid for every time I said parallels and reversals, I'd be a very rich man. But I do think the fundamentals of storytelling all come down to like what parallels you set up and what reversals you can make the best stories. And that's set up and payoff, all those things that are all tied into that. And speaking of that, in the last novella, Igorov, you have this setup and this concept of the triplets and the one, and the revenge. And at any point, did you feel like, um, this guy, like, how much did you want him to be aware that he was fooled, that he, or that he died not, or that he never knows these types of things, like from the beginning? How much of that did you have thought out?
That brilliant, great question, man. That thing bothered me the whole way. Like how much of to be honest with you, to me it was an afterthought. In the end,
Yeah.
meaning in the end it was like, well, okay, I guess then he like learns it on his death,
Yeah.
because to me it was the play. Egorov's all about the playground. It's all about Egorov's personality. It's all about the cat and mouse in the house. It's all about eating the rat dinner for one. It's all about the two brothers like returning, obsessively. Although they were a little more measured than like Goblin obsessives, and like but it was on my mind the whole time. Like, wait, what about Egor? Like, how does Egor like this? Like, how much does he need to know? And like, how much does he like this kind of thing? So the answer to that is not planned out. And you can even argue even a little lazy at the end. You could like as he's dying, he sees like, oh shit, I was tricked. And it's like, but okay, that's how it ended. Because to me, the point of this one was the game, like the game between it. How it ended didn't really matter. So, except for, man, maybe this is why Misha, the dude that's jailed that asked to be hung and everything. So he solved for me the the depth that was lacking in that area.
Mhm.
So you have the game, and I love Igorov, and I love the twins and all that, and I love the dad. I call him Gregory, but it's like I don't even know how to almost say it in the Russian accent. And the father did da 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 da. But Misha gave me a chance to just like an old like a Russian novel. It's just like a flight of fancy about death. To talk about death for 3 pages for no reason. And that's one of my favorite things about like Russian novels is that there'll be like these flights of philosophical fancy out of nowhere. And so Misha gave me that depth that I feel like Igorov's end maybe doesn't really have. Okay. All right. So his end, okay. But the real end of the story is Misha saying, come for me, strangle me with a black yarn. Like to me, Misha played a bigger role than just a cutaway. He was actually like a philosophical, kind of like Dado in Incidents, the
Yeah.
moments where Dado's able to give us monologues. Misha did that for me in Igorov.
Yeah. And so what it really does is that, and you just hit on it where it gives you a tie to the concept and the title, and gives your black yarn a place in your
Yeah.
canon, right? And what I think Igorov does too is it really also gives more, that novella gives more of a setting to Sam Hatton, and kind of then also places it in the universe with Daphne in a really cool way, you know. So
I would love to go back to Little Russia, man. I would love to go back. And also Misha actually seems like he would have been more from Goblin. Like he's an
yeah,
obsessed. He was like,
yeah,
remember they found him like smelling the crime scene?
yeah.
Yeah, like that. Now we're talking.
Well, and Russian personalities are
Oh yeah.
so intense, and they create great characters, and you
Yeah.
should know, it's funny, there's in my in my in our basketball run where I play, this is going to relate, but every Monday and Wednesday night we hoop at this park, Robb Field, which is like right off the Pacific Ocean, and sometimes it's difficult to shoot when the ocean is good breeze,
Yeah.
but like towards the end of the pandemic, there was this guy who was deep on the bench at University of San Diego, and their gym was closed. And he started coming and hooping with us, and he was Belarusian basketball player, and he's now a G League player for Austin Spurs, by the way.
Really?
And we got a lesson in. We all think we're okay hoopers or whatever, and then we had this guy who's like now just in the G League, but like he would go 10% and he would just like crush us,
Yeah.
right? And dunk on us. And he had this great Russian personality, and he kind of looked like Dolph Lundgren. And the first time I ever played with him, he said, "What's your name?" And I said, "Oh, it's David." And he's like, "David, you get me ball, I get you buckets. Okay? Get me ball, I get you buckets." And uh, and this guy like just like didn't even try, right? But I saw so much of his Russian personality when he would like laugh with us, joke with us, and just like play with us like we were mice, right? Because like we're trying to hoop with this guy. And by the way, he did come to the Last Night to Kill Nazis book release party. So
Are
I
you
give this
serious?
guy a lot of credit. And
Man,
and he and I had told him, the whole thing started that the main character of my novel was born in the same city in Belarus as him, because my grandfather was born in Minsk. And I learned so much about from just hooping with this guy.
yeah.
I saw so many like funny aspects of what of his Russian personality, and it's just a funny observation. And I think that there's a lot to mine about, to get back to your books, to mine in Little Russia, and I would love to see a novel set there,
Yeah.
or you
Even
know,
even a modern one.
yeah,
Like it doesn't have to be like a throwback. Like what's happening just like Little Russia right now. Like right
yeah,
now, like yeah, yeah. I would love to do that. And I think you're right. There's like a naturally and finish is almost like this with like some like a frazzled edge to it. Where it's
there,
like there's some
there's a
natural color to like the Russian personality. And Allison is full finish and like oh my God. It's almost like you take the Russian personality and like electrocute it.
yeah,
Eh,
and that Russian personality is so confident, and
oh yeah.
so and
Direct.
directed, yeah. And but I yeah, I give I give him a lot of credit, because you know, he could have also destroyed us a lot harder. I could tell he was only going like 10% on us.
Oh,
And
David, there's two dudes that I played with in my life that are similar to what you're describing, but not even G level. Like, but they played overseas
yeah,
and same exact thing. Like they were barely, I mean, you could just see it, like barely giving it and just, oh my God, crushing us. And like it was incredible to see. Like they were just breaking a sweat and they needed to break a sweat. And
yeah,
we were like, giving it all. And it was like, holy cow, these guys. There were two dudes. One was kind of a slasher and the other one was like a shooter. And that shooter, I mean, it was the greatest thing I've ever seen in person, you know?
yeah, totally. And the other thing he said to me, there was one time where I played with him where, he was getting triple teamed and I was able to make a few shots. But this other time I missed two shots in a row and I was coming down the court and I started clapping for the ball because no one was guarding me. And he's like, David, I love you, but you ain't getting me shit. And I was like, okay. All right, you're right. I'm not shooting well
You
tonight.
gotta send me the guy's name now. I want to follow his career.
Yeah, I will. I'll send you his Instagram link. And but he was super nice guy, and I just when he showed up to the book release party, I was shocked. But
Yeah,
he's
that's all. That is freaking awesome.
yeah, but well, it's funny. Some of the guys that I've hooped with for 8 years didn't come.
Oh, I've got moments like that too. I got friends who I'm like, have you read one of my books yet? You know what I mean? But they don't read.
Right,
You know?
right. Dudes that
Wait,
I've hooped with for, but a bunch of hoopers did show up for it, and I will say that, and a bunch of our hoop dudes, and it is interesting too because I do one day I'm going to write a book that's going to include a bunch of the San Diego Hoopers in it. And they're a little upset that they're not main characters. But I told them I was like, "Hey, you're in the fucking book. Just shut up." But
that's another thing. I want to write the twin story, and I also a modern Little Russia, but I also want to write another basketball book. Just because you write one doesn't mean that you don't get to write another one, man.
well, yeah, I have one basket. I have a full on basketball idea, but I don't know if I'll ever write that one. But I have one where a guy is an Ocean Beach hooper, just like where because we have like three runs in this little hippie surf town part of San Diego, and there's such a weird and funny culture around like hooping there because people come from all over the county to play at the OB runs.
Oh wow.
And yeah, it's neat and such personalities. We've got one guy who's a demolition expert from the Navy that plays there. We've got um, a redneck conspiracy theory guy. Like, so when I start going through all the characters, then I'm
Yeah,
like, you know, it's fun.
yeah.
But yeah, Christoph from Clash, and like he and I have talked about, like, I keep telling him, like, yeah, when you come out for StokerCon, you got to try and plan to hoop with us one time. So just to because he's like, I want to meet these characters. But speaking of hoop, I got to get you out to hoop, and Josh, it's always a pleasure talking riding with you. If people are interested, the Goblin, I've got the Goblin one up, the Mallory one up, and we did one other one, and then the basketball one with Stephen Graham Jones and Paul Tremblay.
Yeah.
Um, and so those are up there. And for my listeners, this after this episode, the next one is the continuing Science Fiction Hall of Fame series. We're going to be doing Nightfall by Isaac Asimov, and I've got an actual astronomer, Isaac Asimov biographer, and Seth from Hugo's there. So it's going to be a powerhouse talking about a 1940s classic. So we're still in the 40s with the Science Fiction Hall of Fame. And if you haven't listened to that series, people go back the especially uh you know talking about those 30s, 20s, and 30s science fiction, I think is really important. People got to learn the history of that. So that's why we do those episodes. So that one's their next episode after this one is Nightfall. So, or it should be. And we have Izzy Lee coming up talking
Oh,
about,
no way.
yeah,
That's
Izzy,
great.
yeah, Izzy Lee is going to be coming back to talk
Oh, I
about
love her.
Secret
That's
Lies.
yeah.
Yeah, she'll be returning. So just to give a shout out to some of the things coming down the pike on the pod. And over at Dickheads, I'll be doing all kinds of interviews at the Philip K. Dick Festival. And it's we're making the pilgrimage to Phil's grave, Phil and Jane's grave, in Colorado. I did not choose the location. If it were up to me, it'd be in California, so we could go to all of his houses. But I do think that's going to be a phenomenal weekend. So if people want to come out for that, please do. And on that note, is there anything else you want to say, Josh, before we go?
Yeah, thank you. This was absolutely wonderful. And thank you for listening, everyone. And now I'm going to go to the bathroom because that was a good long talk.
All right. On that note, see you later, folks.